Gene, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast today.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. First and foremost, we want to thank the wonderful Gail Simone for connecting us because I've been a huge fan of your work for some time. Thrilled to finally be speaking with you. And she was kind of our mutual friend that got us in touch. So thank you to Gail.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Gail too. I mean, we're friends now. We're friends because we've been on panels together.
Yes.
And and through Twitter, but I was a fan of hers for a very long time. Since she was like she started as a blogger, right? I remember reading her blog way back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of
to becoming
cool.
a comic book writer.
Exactly. What's kind of cool about Gail is like she's still technically kind of blogging on Twitter. Like she still is basically giving us all of her wonderful Gail thoughts all the time. And it's just an amazing thing to be able to follow. So
that's right.
Well, I've been really fortunate to speak with a lot of wonderful creators on this podcast, especially during quarantine and through the pandemic, because a lot of them were like, yeah, sure, call me. I'm free right now. And some of them shared this situation has been motivating because they found that they had like more time to be able to work creatively, while others really struggled during this last year and a half. And I was just wondering how you're doing and how you managed over the last year and a half.
Well, thanks for asking. I think overall, I feel like I've been lucky, right? I've been healthy and my family's been healthy, but it has also been difficult. So I used to work out of a workspace.
Okay.
I was like the only comic book guy there. It was like mostly like programmers and stuff, because I live in the Silicon Valley.
Right.
But now like the division between family and work is just like for so many of us, it's kind of gone. My wife and I, we have 4 kids. They were all home for the last year and a half. And there were times where it was a little challenging to kind of balance everything out.
I would guess so, with 4 kids.
Yeah.
That is amazing though. What ages are they?
So we have a 17-year-old who just graduated high school.
Okay.
And then a 14-year-old who just graduated 8th grade. And then we have an 11-year-old and a 9-year-old.
Oh, okay. So you're not like busy at all.
Well, in some ways we do feel lucky because we have friends with much younger kids.
Right. The little toddlers.
Yeah. I think sometimes that could be kind of nutty, right? To have to keep them in all day.
Yeah. It's nice because they kind of have their independence. They're at that age where they feed themselves and they're on their iDevices probably a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's right.
Are they really into comics as well?
They like reading comics, but none of them want to do it for a job.
Right.
Like the 2 younger ones just had to do like comics-based assignments for school. They had to make their own little comics for school. And at the end of the project, they're like, "Dad, we are never doing this ever again."
I mean, I'm sorry, but I would so much. Oh my gosh, I would totally be like, "Dad, can you help me with this project?" Kind of have an upper hand there with that one, but
oh man, yeah, they're not into it. They all love art of some kind.
Yeah,
but none of them want to do comics.
Well, I feel like that's sort of maybe just because of the nature of the job, it is so challenging, but also we tend to veer away from our parents' professions, right? Like that's just like human nature. But
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and now you're in California now. Did you also grow up there?
I did. I've spent my whole life in like this hour radius.
Oh, okay.
I spent most of my childhood in the San Jose area. I went up to the East Bay for college. I went to UC Berkeley, and then I lived up there for a really long time. Eventually moved back down, so I'm in San Jose again.
Okay, I see. And what was that lifestyle for you? So I grew up in Orlando, Florida. It was very it was not as developed as it is now, nor as diverse as it is now. And so I do know in California, there's a lot more diversity. What was that kind of growing up in that area for you?
Well, this might be the same with Orlando, but when I was a kid, when we first moved into the neighborhood where I spent most of my childhood, we were one of just a handful of Asian American families there. And there's so few of us there that my mom was actually able to go to the elementary school where I was going to attend and ask them for the names and the addresses of the other Chinese families in the neighborhood. There are only two.
Right.
And then we went and made house calls, right? Which I think now would be such a weird thing to do. But back then, I mean, this was like late 70s. It was that's what we did.
Yeah.
And then as I was growing up, more and more Asian American families moved into the neighborhood. So by the
Mm-hmm.
time I graduated from high school, we were a sizable minority. And now those same neighborhoods are predominantly Asian American.
I see.
So I grew up during this weird transition in that family. And I think there were some tensions that came out of that transition,
Of
right?
course.
There's some people who definitely felt that change and were not happy about it.
Yeah, yeah, I can only imagine. It's just like you see in any of the BIPOC community areas where, oh, quote unquote, they are moving into the neighborhood, and it gets that like you said, that racial tension. But of course, racism has always been an issue in this country for so many
Mhm.
different minorities and backgrounds. But since obviously the start of the pandemic, it's been especially challenging for Asian Americans. Um, I am a huge activist, and so I'm very outspoken on a lot of these issues. But during AAPI Heritage Month, I was literally like trying to get everyone I knew to read American Born Chinese and your book, because I read it back a while ago, of course, and I've read it several times since then. But it's just something that really resonated with me as an Asian American, and it was just so amazing to find this story that I could connect with, but also shared some really cool things about the Chinese culture and the Monkey King and the folk tales that I grew up knowing about, but in a really fun and light way, in a sense. And so basically, one of the themes that really resonated was trying to fit in, and that that assimilation, and what maybe we know now is to be sort of like that model minority myth of us just kind of like
Mhm.
fitting into this mold. um how was that for you kind of growing up? I mean, do you like kind of reflect that through your storytelling, or because I know I've read a lot of the afterwards and you kind of share some of the stories that have happened to you, but like yeah, I just really want to hear kind of about that connectivity, especially that this is such an crazy time right now for all Asian
Yeah,
Americans.
yeah. Yeah, it really is a crazy time right now. I think, like a lot of Asian Americans, maybe immigrants, kids in general, I did go through a period of time, especially when I was a kid, where I wanted to be somebody else. I wanted to fit in better. And there were times when I would look in the mirror and I would wish that I looked different. I would be embarrassed when I went out with my parents, not just because of the way we all looked, but also because of the way my parents sounded, when they speak
Hmm.
English. And for my parents, English for my mom, it was her fourth language, and for my dad, it was his third, right? So they're like, as an adult, I realized they're amazing people,
Right.
but as a kid, like all you can hear is that accent,
Yes.
and I think a lot of that is sort of me absorbing how Asian Americans were supposed to be seen from the stories that surrounded me. So in the 80s, I grew up mostly in the 70s and the 80s. One of the biggest movies when I think I was in junior high or high school that came out was 16 Candles,
Yeah, of
directed by
course.
John Hughes,
Hmm.
which is funny, and it definitely captures something about what it was like to be a teenager in the 80s. But it also
Hmm.
has multiple problematic elements,
Yes.
and one of those is Long Duck Dong, who is this
Hmm.
Chinese exchange student. I remember um, my classmates would go and watch this movie at the theater and then come back and call us Long Duck Dong.
Of
So it
course.
was just I think rather than getting mad about that when I was a kid, I just kind of internalized it, and I learned to see like my parents and especially like Asian American kids who are more recent immigrants
Hmm.
as these Long Duck Dong characters.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like what's interesting, because I share the same background. I share that same like
Mm,
recollection of those movies, and like, oh, this is fun, and like we all love John Hughes movies, and then, but like you said, when you look back, you're like, wow, this was not okay in any way. Like,
yeah,
there's so many
yeah.
things that are problematic looking back, and it's kind of that subtle racism, right? And you shared a story at the back of one of your of one of your comics of looking up to one of the kids in school and thinking they're so cool, and then him calling you the word that rhymes with stink, and like
Yeah.
I feel that, because in one way it's not like, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, it's not like you were getting beat up every week on the street or anything super violent, but it's the subtle racism that actually comes back to creep up on you, and you just like have these kind of like identity issues, like for me
Yeah, yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
like it's the subtle racism. So it's not like I can say, oh man, I had all these horrible, feelings of oppression and all these crazy things, but there was constant things like, making fun of your lunch or making fun of the way, you look like this person or your eyes are so small, or it's just like the small comments, but those add up over time. And I think depending on who you are, um, what you grow up around, that like shapes us as people, and it has long lasting effects for sure.
Mhm. I think that's exactly right. I mean, for me at least, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't violent for the most part, right? I have friends who have much worse experiences growing up, especially in terms of violence. And then if you look at the history of Asians in America, there are periods of time where things were just intensely
Yes,
violent. And unfortunately, it seems like some of that is cropping up
of
now, right?
course.
Post pandemic. But for me, a lot of it really was that. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's like it was subtle. I mean, sometimes it wasn't even that subtle. Like I remember more than once. It was actually I can think of this happening multiple times throughout my childhood. My friends and I, I hung out with mostly Asian American kids when I was in junior high. We would be walking down the street, like we'd be walking from school to the local 7-Eleven. And we'd just be, talking about whatever kids talk about, video games and teachers and whatever. And then somebody would drive past us in a car and just yell something at us out of the car, right? And immediately we would all feel embarrassed, as if we had done something wrong. We would go from being regular kids, thinking about the things that kids think about, to thinking about being Asian, thinking about what like wanting to kind of escape our Asian bodies.
Right.
And so there are overt things like that. And then there are these other incidents, a lot of what you're talking about, where you're not totally sure if something is racially motivated or not. And you worry, like I remember just being worried that I was being paranoid when I was a kid. Am I being paranoid? Am I seeing racism where there isn't any?
Right.
I think all of that kind of combines to just this need to escape who you are. That at least for me, I really had to work through to become an adult.
What was that turning point like for you? Because for me, obviously, I'm a kung fu teacher who's taken over my father's legacy. So it would seem that I was always on board with like being all about my Asian heritage, but that was definitely not the case. Like my mom is Chinese, but she's Jamaican. So I kind of gravitated a lot more towards that culture just because my most of her family is here. But like I purposely didn't want to go to Chinese school. So of course my Chinese is horrible now, and I had to learn later in life, which as an adult, it's horrible. But like there was a turning point for me where I literally realized, no, like this is who I am and want to be, right? And so what was that turning point like for you where you started to embrace your heritage? Because you clearly embrace it now with the perpetuation and proliferation of all these stories and sharing. And but what was that? Was there a turning point, or was it very gradual?
Yeah, for me, it was in college. UC Berkeley, it was the very first environment that I was in where there was a fairly sizable Asian American, like UC Berkeley. While I was there from 91 to 95. During those 4 years, Asian Americans became the largest ethnic group on campus. So we weren't over 50%, but we just became the largest, right? And there was something about that, something about being in a place where it wasn't weird to be Asian American, that you weren't you weren't really a minority, right? As an Asian American, that made me see things through a different lens. I saw people who would walk around campus like they were perfectly comfortable, and it kind of woke me up a little bit. I think that was the moment where I was like, this is who I am, and I have to figure this out. I think doing American Born Chinese really was a way of me figuring it out as well.
Wow. Okay. So let's jump into that a bit, because obviously like I adore this book. Like I am so connected to it, and I tell everyone, like I said, to read it. But like you kind of, what was like the impetus? Like what kind of made you go, you know what, I want to tell this story? And or has it always been in the back burner of your mind, your creative mind, or was there kind of like, how did it come about?
Parts of it have definitely always been in the back burner of my mind. So I grew up with the Monkey King story. I heard Monkey King stories from my mom at bedtime. I always wanted to adapt his story to comics, but I couldn't figure out a way of doing it until I hit on the idea of using the Monkey King as a way of talking about the Chinese American experience. But the other thing was, I started American Born Chinese in the year 2000. And up until that point, I'd done a few comics. I'd done like these mini comics that were self-published. And I always had Asian American protagonists, but their Asian Americanness never played an important role in the story. So I wanted to do something where that was the focus, where being a Chinese American was what the story was about. So that ended up being American More Chinese.
Yeah, and congrats, of course, on all that success and all the awards, which are unbelievably well deserved. What was that like to kind of have that accolade just kind of like right out of the gate?
Oh, it was crazy. It was a nutty, like that book came out in 2006. That was a nutty year, right?
Mhm.
All the stuff that I never thought would have happened. Like first the support that that book got from librarians and teachers and comic book store owners and readers was nuts. And also just even the fact that I got signed with First Second Books, right? The publisher of that book, um, nowadays they're kind of seen as like like one of the premier imprints for young adult graphic novels. But at the time, they were just starting off, right? I remember reading an article that was basically an interview with Mark Siegel, my
Mhm.
editor, who created the entire imprint, and he talked about how he was trying to create this place for cartoonists that was kind of like in between comics culture. It would be like influenced by American and Japanese and European comics, and it would also be in between like the culture of libraries and the culture of bookstores and the culture of comic book shops, right? And I think that he did it. I think that that's exactly what First Second is. But I remember reading that article and really wanting to be a part of it.
Mhm.
So to actually get published by them and to have their support behind the book and to be kind of part of this wave of young adult graphic novels and graphic novels for kids that kind of came up through the early 2000s it was awesome.
Yeah. How long did it take you to finish the project? Because not only did you write it, but you also illustrate. So I always find it amazing when a creator can do both. And so it's just amazing to me because I can't do
I,
either.
I'm I'm such a slow artist. I'm so slow. I have like this really simple style, right? I don't do a lot of cross hatching or anything. But even so, I mean, a graphic novel takes me forever. American More Chinese took me 5 years to finish from
Wow.
beginning to
Okay.
end. So I mean, I had a full time job too. I was a high school teacher at the time,
Mhm.
but it just took me forever to finish from beginning to end.
Well, it was worth the wait for us, and we didn't know we were waiting for it when it came out. But I can imagine like putting so much time into something. It's even more so rewarding that it was so well received and it was so acclaimed. So at least all the time and investment paid off in that regard. But it will perpetuate because it is, like you said, it's being used in studies. And I saw your TED talk and how you just kind of discussed that education and comics naturally go together in your mind, and it took a while for the rest of the education board to get on board with that. I love the partnership because I always feel like I learn a lot from comics. I used to make fun of my husband who got me into comics, that the comic book geek, and I was like, I don't, and he said his vocabulary is good because of comics. I'm like, really? And then once I started reading comics, I was like, oh wow, I need like my dictionary to look things up. Like it is really not what I think people outside of comics expect, right? And so I love that you have this as like that meld as a teaching medium. Maybe you can share how you've seen it successfully applied, and like maybe even how you, because I know that I saw that you used it in your teaching methods as well.
Yeah, it's been great to see. I think in a lot of ways, American More Chinese was a part of this wave that kind of happened. That's still happening right now. It's been maybe the last 20 years. We've really
Mhm.
seen acceptance of comic books and graphic novels in educational settings. And really at the forefront of that were librarians. I think librarians in the 80s and 90s, they were really the first to kind of see how comics could be a part of American classrooms. And then there were some books that were super important to that, right? There was Mouse, which won
Mhm.
the Pulitzer in the 90s, first graphic novel to do that. Only graphic novel, I believe, so far to have done that.
Okay.
And then Craig Thompson's Blankets
Okay.
was huge. I think it created this category for literary young adult graphic novels in people's minds. So I feel like the attention that American War Chinese got a few years later was really, I benefited a ton from the work that Craig did. It's been awesome. I think it's exactly like what you said, right? Like I personally have learned so much from reading comics. I've been reading comics since I was in 5th grade, including vocabulary like your husband. I remember when I took the SATs, there was a word on my SAT, skinflint. And the only reason I knew what a skinflint was because I read Uncle Scrooge comics. A skinflint is somebody who loves money, right? Who's like super cheap and miserly.
Right.
And I remember like in the comics, like Uncle Scrooge would constantly be getting called a skinflint.
Oh, wow. So, see, there you go.
Right?
Further proof. It obviously helped your SAT score, which made you go to Berkeley. So comics is good for everyone. That's it. I'm going to let all parents know that argue with me on this. I'm like, no. I mean, the point is also this, right? Yes, I love reading. I'm more of an audiobook listener now, but like for kids, especially young adults and adults even, right? If there's something more entertaining that can also be educational, why not offer that, right? Instead of shoving down the same curriculum, the same books that, yes, some of the greats are important. I see the value, but I really, as a teacher myself, don't see value in trying to like make something fit the mold when not all kids learn the same, not all kids absorb the same. And so if this speaks to, kids, it's definitely, very, very educational and beneficial. Right. So
yeah. I totally agree with all of that. I think, like I do love prose books too, and I think like you, I do read a lot of, audiobooks nowadays because you could do
still counts. Okay.
Yeah.
It still counts.
Yeah, it still counts. Yeah, you could do
authors have told me it still counts, so therefore it's
totally
true.
Still counts. It totally still counts. But and I think there are like you said, like certain students are going to gravitate towards certain media, and I think the same is true for stories. There are certain stories that are best told through certain media, right? So there are certain stories that I think work best as a prose book.
Right.
But there are also stories that work best as a graphic novel. And because of that, I think because historically American classrooms have kind of excluded graphic novels, they've excluded this entire category of stories that kids can learn from and enjoy.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like they purposely wanted to bore us in school. That's how I felt, because I was a good student because I had to be. Like I was a student who got good grades, but I don't really feel I was a great learner, especially at the time, because I just felt I wasn't engaged. Right. And so I did it because I will talk about Asian stereotypes. Like, obviously I had to be an A student. Like we talk about like, no, stereotypes are bad. But at the same time, there are some Asian stereotypes. And one I wanted to ask you about was your as a comics creator, but I know that you were a teacher as well. Like, how were your parents in your career choices? Like, were they stereotypical with, no, you should be a doctor, lawyer kind of thing? Or
wait, were your parents okay with you being a teacher?
Well, no. So here's the thing. My dad is a Kung Fu master, right? And so he wants me to be a Kung Fu teacher.
I see.
So okay, so because
it's part of
our lineage, right? It's part of our lineage. But if I didn't choose that, then I probably needed to make sure I was a doctor or a lawyer.
Yeah, it was exactly that. So I was my dad sat me down right before I went to college, and he gave me the doctor, lawyer, engineer talk. So I got a degree in computer science. I got my bachelor's in computer science, which
of course you did.
Yeah, but I did get a minor in creative writing. He didn't care about that as much,
right?
But after I graduated, I worked as a programmer for a couple of years.
Okay.
He didn't say anything; it was fine. And then I decided to quit to become a high school teacher. I taught computer science for 17 years at a Oakland high school.
Okay.
And I started, really focusing on comics. And at that point, he was not happy. I took my Berkeley degree and I went and became a high school teacher. And it is kind of funny because we would have these talks, and both my parents would talk about how in Chinese culture, teachers are revered. It's like a really big deal.
Yeah, you're a scholar.
Yeah. It's a really it's an awesome thing it's an awesome way to spend your life within the context of traditional Chinese culture. But they just felt like here in America, it's different. Like here in America, you have to be doctor, lawyer,
Mhm.
or engineer. So my dad for years, every few months, he used to send me this little envelope with these like newspaper clippings. You know, there'd be like want ads from Apple Computer, or it would be like these articles that would compare salaries, you know, and you would highlight the teacher's salary and the programmer's salary.
Oh my God, that is so
Every few months I'd get one of these little
Oh
envelopes.
my God. I love that. I love that we can laugh about this now, especially because you're such a success and everything. But like, gosh, it is, and bless them because we know it's because they do care. It's because they want you to
Yeah,
not struggle. It's because they want you to have why they immigrated here. They immigrated here.
yeah.
Okay,
They
yeah.
did. They
That's
did.
the reason, right? They wanted the opportunity. And it's like, what? You're gonna be a teacher? Like
Yeah, yeah,
so I know
yeah.
the
That's exactly
intent
it.
is good, but it's always frustrating because passion is passion. And I really believe like people should do what they love. Because then I think everybody would be more successful if everyone was doing what they loved, right? Like
Yeah.
it would all work out somehow. But I love that your dad would send you those articles. That is hilarious.
Yeah, it's such an immigrant dad thing to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Where are they from? Where are your parents from?
My dad grew up in Taiwan. My
Okay.
mom was born in mainland China, but she grew up in Hong Kong and then Taiwan.
Ah,
So
so
they both came from Taiwan.
okay,
So
because when you
yeah.
said four languages, I'm thinking, okay, how many dialects are we talking here?
Yeah,
That's
it's all dialects. Yeah, yeah. So my
yeah,
dad speaks Mandarin and Taiwanese,
Taiwanese.
and then my mom, I think it's Shanghainese,
Hmm.
Cantonese, Mandarin, and English.
Wow. I know it makes us in America always feel very um subpar when I travel because you go to Europe and the bus
Yeah,
driver speaks like 8 languages and I'm like, here
yeah,
I am with my one and a half,
yep.
Do you
Yeah,
speak
that's right.
Cantonese or Mandarin
I
or
speak
Taiwanese?
Mandarin barely. Yeah, I was raised speaking Mandarin because that was the common language that my parents had with each
Yeah.
other.
Okay. I've been
Um,
trying to figure it out from all your books if you spoke Mandarin or Cantonese because sometimes I was guessing Mandarin because you put Shifu and stuff like that. But then sometimes I'm like, oh, you refer to like Cantonese stuff. So I was
yeah.
trying to guess.
Yeah, it's because my mom spoke Cantonese with her
Right.
siblings,
Yeah, I love
So
it.
I would hear it, and I think when I was younger, I could understand it, but I
Okay.
lost it as I
Yeah,
got
it's
older.
tough.
Yeah,
It's so tough. It's
yeah.
such
How
a
about
hard
you?
language.
Did you grow up with
So
Cantonese
I grew up with
or
Cantonese. We teach
okay?
in Cantonese at the school, but that's because my father's from southern China.
I see.
Our kung fu style is actually northern, but because my father is Cantonese, speaks Cantonese, that's what we speak there.
I see.
But later in life, I took Mandarin because I take tours to China with the students as a cultural exchange. We do like training, we have like affiliations over there. And so I'd have to give these speeches in Mandarin. And it was so embarrassing because I know that I sound like a 7-year-old because all of the elders and everyone's like giggling and like they're almost like patting me on the head, kind of like, oh, you're so
Yeah,
cute, with your like little Mandarin, but I try.
I've had
You
that too.
understand.
I
Yeah,
totally understand.
yeah, you
100%.
totally understand. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
okay. It's so embarrassing, but you kind of just have to embrace it and not be afraid to make mistakes when it comes to language is what I've learned. And if you're trying in any country, I feel like you just gain a little bit of respect for at least trying,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to keep it up. But oh my gosh, it's so funny. But I did want to ask you because you on your website you say you're a cartoonist and teacher, and obviously you're both. Do you identify as one more than the other, or is it just by the phase of your life, or?
Yeah, I guess nowadays I'm more. I mean, this year I'm more comic book writer than cartoonist. I actually
Yeah.
don't have any projects that I'm working on currently where I'm drawing. I'm doing all
Hmm.
writing, and I still do a little bit of teaching. I teach through Hamlin University. I teach as part of their MFA program. But I do miss teaching. I
Yeah.
really loved being a high school teacher. It was a big decision for me to leave. I was at that school for 17 years, and I remember going in to talk to my principal about leaving, and afterwards, I mean, it felt like a breakup. To be honest, like I
Yeah.
couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat for a while. It just, yeah,
Yeah.
it felt like I was ending like a romantic relationship or something.
Yeah.
It was that
Well,
same sort of hurt.
so many years, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you
Yeah,
get attached as teachers to even like not necessarily the exact students themselves. Some, of course, there's always those
yeah.
special students that really like go above and beyond and everything, but just kind of like the relationship building of feeling like you're enriching lives and hoping you're enriching lives anyways.
Yeah,
But
and being a
yeah.
part of a community and having
Yes.
people to eat lunch with. Like I eat
Oh.
lunch mostly. At least before the pandemic. Now I eat with my family.
Right.
But before the pandemic, I would eat by myself, as a cartoonist.
Right. Well, everybody says that in comics because, of course, I'm so fortunate. I talk to so many creators and they're like, yeah, it's kind of a lonely thing, which is why we like conventions because we meet people, we get to like get the feedback because it's like, oh, everyone's reading and loving your books. And maybe if you go on and read your reviews, it's still not the same as that that human contact and having people tell you how important the work was to you and just smile. And, so that's what they always seem to express. And of course, because of the pandemic, all the conventions were canceled and everything.
I know. Yeah, I've been feeling it. Like I think I got a little traveled out like right before pandemic because I was traveling a lot. But now I don't miss being on an airplane, but I do miss like hanging out with people at conventions and stuff. That was fun.
Yeah, they always told me, oh, that's kind of like our reunions. Like we get to see our friends that we normally don't really get to see all the time because everyone's always sprinkled throughout the world. And they always defined it as, oh, this is when we get together as well as, meet the fans and everything.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Do you have anything lined up for conventions or anything you think you might do in the
nothing settled yet. Nothing's concrete. How about you? Are you planning on going to anything before
not right now. I actually hosted a panel at San Diego Comic-Con, I guess the 50th anniversary, which was 2 years ago now, right? And so I had not really gone to very many conventions. That was only my second convention I've ever been to, ironically. And both conventions I'd been to, I was a panelist, which was kind of interesting as well, because I kind of like scared of crowds and I'm a little bit of a homebody, even though I know it seems like I'm an extroverted person and it's very bizarre, but yeah, so both times I was actually a panelist. Like the first time I was invited to one in Atlanta because of my Mulan connection and they wanted me to talk to, the cosplayers. And then I did my own panel for San Diego. And that's when I met a lot of creators as well and kind of stalked people down that I really love and was like, hey, but that was really nice. But yeah, so I wasn't like a crazy convention goer, but I did have stuff that I was going to do. I got invited to Hawaii and I'm like, any opportunity to go to Hawaii, I'll take. And, that got canceled. So that was a bummer. But but yeah, I don't have any conventions currently that I haven't gotten on a plane yet. So,
okay.
Yeah. So like you, I'm in Florida where we could drive to the beach. We could, you have a little bit of access. And so I consider myself so fortunate. I've been able to take little mini breaks, like rent an Airbnb and sanitize it like crazy and then go inside. Like during the pandemic, I was able to have like mini breaks, but I haven't traveled yet. So I'm a little bit, I'm fully vaccinated, but but it's kind of scary. So positive representation matters now, like more than ever. And it's just kind of this period where, here you are on the scene and there's so much more wokeness and the public's a little more aware of kind of being more careful. And Superman smashes the Klan and DC's Monkey Prince are just super exciting for everybody, but I think especially for Asian Americans. And I know you've talked a lot about this in recent interviews through Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, but like I'd love for you to share kind of your feelings towards all of that, because these are just stories that represent us in such a different way. And of course we see like the Marvel character coming out soon. And so there's like a little bit of a shift maybe.
Yeah, it's been kind of nuts to see things change over the last few years. I think first of all, there is this awareness that we do need stories that tell every kind of story, right? We need like America is growing more diverse, so we need our stories to reflect that diversity. I just don't think I've seen comics take it as seriously as we are now. And I think for the most part, it's been great. I think we are getting a higher quality of story about our minority characters because of the attention that is being paid, right? And I was actually just joking with my my Marvel editor. So I'm doing Shang-Chi for Marvel, and it's the first ongoing series that the character has had in, I don't know, like 20 years, something like that, or 30 years maybe. And it just feels like it feels like when it rains Asians, it pours Asians. Like it feels like, like all of a sudden I have, I was able to do Superman Smashes the Klan, and then the Monkey Prince with DC Comics, and now Shang-Chi with Marvel, all in the space of like a year and a half or 2 years or whatever.
Right.
And these are projects that I feel like probably would not have been able to get off the ground, even 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Right.
And now it's all kind of happening at once.
Exactly.
So.
But like, take it while it's here, right?
Yeah, exactly.
As an artist and a writer, that
you never know when
you never know
what's
you don't know what the future holds. Like, that's just art in general. You're just kind of like, well, but yeah, that's funny. You said it's raining Asians.
Yeah.
I loved Superman Smashes the Klan, and I wasn't familiar with the original storyline, and it was just so cool to see Superman also not saving the day alone, and also going on his own journey of reflection and finding himself. And I know there's been a lot of arcs where they kind of play on that, but I learned a lot from that comic, not just the comic itself, but like your whole writing on the back afterwards and everything. So what I really love though was like, the young heroine character, like seeing the young Asian American girl, and that representation. I think it's so important right now, especially, right? And I think it's really, it must be kind of surreal maybe to, like you said, have all these projects kind of happening at once, but being able to represent so many people just within the Asian American community. You're getting like young Asian girl that can look up to someone that looks and feels like her, but then you got the Monkey Prince with his like, badass like superhero character, and of course Shang-Chi. So it's like, even within Asian Americans, you're like targeting so many different people, and like the outreach is really widespread, so that must feel really positive.
It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun to be a part of it. I think Superman Smashes the Klan, especially, I proposed it to Marie Javins, who's the editor-in-chief now. I believe she's the first female editor-in-chief of DC Comics. Right? DC Comics has been around since the late 1930s, and it took this long. But she's amazing. I mean, she kind of built up this legendary reputation for herself at both Marvel and DC. Everybody who's worked with her knows that she really knows story, and so I feel incredibly lucky to have been able to work with her on Superman Smashes the Klan. I mean, I also got to work with Diego Lopez and Paul Kaminsky, who's one of my favorite editors ever, who's also at DC Comics. So I feel like the team that they kind of put together on that, with we also had Guri Huru do it and do the art. I think they're like among the elite of the elite. Like their art is just so charismatic, and then Janice Chang did the letters. So that even the team itself, having a female editor who eventually becomes like the first DC Comics, like female DC Comics editor-in-chief, and then an all Asian creative team was just I don't know if you could have done that, right? Like 10 or 15 years ago. I don't know if you could have done that. For the main character for that story, Roberta Lee, she actually does show up in the original 1947 radio show, but she's just never given any lines. She's just mentioned in the line of dialogue.
Okay.
So one of the things that fascinated me about that 1947 radio show was the fact that there were Asians in it.
Right.
Like
exactly.
It's such an old Superman story.
Yes.
I read Superman all the way through since the 1980s. I don't remember any Asians in those Superman stories.
Right.
But to find out that there were Asians in 1947, I think, like, I just think that in a lot of ways, like the big thing that we struggle with is this perception of perpetual foreignness, right? No matter how long we've been here, we're still seen as foreigners in certain corners of America. So to find out that, 1947 was near the beginning of Superman, was near the beginning of this American icon. So to find out that there were Asian Americans at the beginning of this American icon, there was just something very affirming about that. I think that was the feeling that I kind of carried through as I was working on that project, was that we've always been here. We've been here at least since 1946, definitely before, but according to the story, at least since 1946, and that's what I wanted to bring to the reader.
Yeah, and like you said though, and you've said in your writing that a lot of the Asian representation has been problematic. Like there has been Asian
Yeah.
representation, but it's been
Yeah.
super problematic, just like the 1980s films and Breakfast at Tiffany's, and like we, you can go
Yeah.
into
Yeah. Yeah.
media, but and it's so great that we have creators like yourself that are kind of changing that narrative. And so to me, even though this last year has been pretty crappy and so much
Mhm.
negativity, but like you said, it's the kind of a perfect storm as well of everyone's a little more careful as well. So maybe that plays into more green lights for films and media and comics. Like I think that
Mhm.
it brings out awareness. So like I try to look at the positive side of things, and with like all of this is kind of bringing attention to the issues that we have been plagued with for such
Yeah.
a long time.
Yeah.
One of the things I really am grateful to you for is that I do really find the Chinese culture fascinating, like the old folk tales and the stories. And I love that you did Boxers and Saints, because then I don't have to read like a boring Wikipedia or like a history book on, hey, what's the Boxer Rebellion about? And so I always I've had the lovely Stan Sakai on the show, and I learned so much
Mm.
about Japanese
Oh,
culture
he's
through
the best.
Usagi.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, maybe I can just request Gene, do some sort of character that he can constantly educate me on all of the Chinese fantasy and folktale stories. And since you're doing such a great job of most of it already, selfishly, I just pretty much am gonna say, like, we'll put that burden on you. I'm just kidding. But
Yeah,
you've
I
done a
do
great
love
job
Stan Sakai
already.
stuff.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. I do feel like, I mean, everything goes through a Chinese American filter, right? I'm definitely an ABC. So when you experience Chinese, like when I talk about Chinese culture, it's always through the lens of an ABC. I feel like that's something I've had to accept. That
Hmm.
I don't know what it's like to live in China, so I
Yeah.
don't know what it's like to grow up in China. So everything will be filtered through this
Yeah.
um, Americanized lens.
Yeah, but I mean, at least there's still a preservation of the culture, right? And so maybe we don't speak perfect Chinese, and we don't know what it's like to have, had to grow up with nothing. And like my father, like
Yeah,
really, when he shares his stories of when the communists came and everything, it is just, I'm never going to go through that, right? And they
yeah,
made sure I
yeah,
would never go through
yeah.
that. And
That's
so
right.
but it's preserving those stories and honoring them, and I think that is exactly what you do through your work. So thank
Yeah,
you for
yeah,
that. It's been really amazing to be able to kind of learn and read and have these amazing stories. But yeah, I was teasing, I don't remember who I was talking to, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna just ask Gene, like, can you just be like the one to like basically share all of them? Keep researching and finding out so that I can learn more. But we have the Monkey Prince, which is we get a little bit of the Monkey King, and of course in American Born Chinese we get Monkey King and a lot of the other gods as well.
yeah, yeah. Bernard and I are definitely reading lots of books right now. Bernard Chang, the
And
artist of Monkey Prince. We're reading lots of books and
oh my gosh,
talking
and
to our relatives. Like I feel like
exactly. You're
calling
like,
up aunties.
hey, Auntie, it's been so
Yeah,
long. So
yeah,
tell me, the
yeah,
moon goddess.
yeah. That's right. That's
Well, what's
exactly what we're
interesting
doing.
about Chinese fables too, it's like sometimes you're getting all these variances, like even like something like August
Yeah,
Moon, right? So if depending on where in China you're from, you kind of get slightly different takes on it,
yeah.
because we're
That's right.
talking, of course there was the Cultural Revolution as well, like we
Uh-huh.
lost so much stuff too, right? Like
Yeah,
actual text, but you're getting secondhand, third hand, for you're getting
yeah.
like
That's right.
old stories, and so it does
Yeah,
change over time. So I think as long as like the main essence is there, we're good. I
yeah.
mean, we can't ever
That's
get
the
it
hope.
100%. Well, some of
Yeah,
those Chinese translated books are really hard to read. Like I've tried to
yeah,
read what is it, Three Kingdoms? Yeah, I've tried to read Three
yeah. Three
Kingdoms like a
Kingdoms is
hundred
rough.
times, and
Yeah,
I'm like, page 4. Oh, let me go back to page 1. It's just,
yeah.
oh, some of those, because as a martial artist, like that was like, oh, I definitely need to read
Mm,
this. And
mm.
Outlaws on the Marsh, and of course Journey to the West, but it's tough reading. Like I'm
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
which
I
is why
agree.
I'm waiting for
Some of
you to
them is
just
tough.
give me the comic book version. So what are
All
you
right, I'm
reading
gonna
then?
work on it.
I know. What are you reading for research then?
Well, so I mean, the big one is Julia Lovell came out with a new translation of Journey to the West. So we're kind of
Oh,
using that as like the premise of the Monkey Prince is that all of the Journey to the West is now canon in DC. It all happened
Yes.
in the DC universe. And Monkey Prince is almost like a DC version of a sequel. So we're all reading that over and over and over again. And then at the center of the original Journey to the West is actually this tension between Buddhism and Taoism, which are two of the three, pillar faiths of Chinese culture. So we've been reading stuff about that as well, trying to figure out how do you bring some of those ideas into the DC universe.
It must take you down a lot of rabbit holes.
Oh,
like, are we going to really use this, or are we just
exactly.
Like,
I gotta stop. I gotta get to work writing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, obviously, right now you're reading like crazy because you're in the midst of creating, these you have deadlines, right? I've learned how that works. You've got deadlines, but when you were reading for fun, and when you get to kind of enjoy, what do you enjoy reading?
Well, so right now I've been reading some of Ram V's stuff. It's actually, it's half work, half pleasure, right?
Okay.
Because Ram V he's a writer. He does a lot of work for DC Comics right now. So I'm reading his stuff in part to find out like what's happening in the DC universe too. Because you got to know so you don't contradict,
right.
That kind of stuff. So he's writing Swamp Thing right now for DC Comics. He's writing Catwoman. He's great. His stuff is amazing. And then Mariko Tamaki too. Mariko and I are friends, but I'm a huge fan of hers. Like even if I didn't like her as a human being, I think I like her comics.
It helps to like her. Though.
It helps. Yeah, it helps to like her. It definitely helps to like her.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Recently, I read this graphic novel called Grass, which is translated from Korean. It's about the comfort women. It's a nonfiction. Okay. Really rough.
Oh.
Like I never it was amazing. I'm glad I read it. I never want to read it again.
Yeah.
So emotionally rough.
Yeah, I don't know if I can handle it, to be honest.
Yeah. How about you? What are you reading?
Well, I've been rereading your stuff to prepare for this interview. I'm reading Invincible because I got hooked because of the show. And then that was a mistake because I'm watching the show and reading the comic and I'm like, wait, did that just happen or did it already happen? And so it confused me, but I'm almost done with it now. And so that's good. I'm always reading Greg Rucka's Lazarus and waiting for his next thing. So, and then I read a lot of prose. I'm in some book clubs and things like that. And so one of my top reads over the quarantine was A Gentleman in Moscow. Which was it was just so good. It was I loved it so much. So yeah, and it makes me sound like really like, I'm a great reader. Not really. I do my best. But it's like you said, audiobook allows you to do other things. So with comics, you have to, have the time to sit down and have time with it. And so that sometimes takes away from my comic time. And then a lot of times if I'm interviewing a creator, I'm like you said, it's half work, half pleasure, because ultimately, selfish as I am, I really only interview the people I really adore and respect as creators. So it's I get to do both. I get to read because I enjoy it, but also because I'm gonna do some interviews and things like that. So so it's a win-win for me, which is why, one of the reasons I started the podcast and everything. So where you said you did I know we're probably coming up on time here, but I know you said you did writing, like creative writing. So how did the illustration, are you just self-taught or?
I did do a lot of practicing when I was a kid. I was, I think like most comic book artists, I was the kid that would just draw on the margins of all of my notes at school.
Okay.
But I also did take a bunch of classes at a junior college right after I got my bachelor's degree. I took a bunch of figure drawing classes, and that was super useful. It was great.
Do you find one process easier or than the other?
I would say this. I would say drawing is more time consuming. It'll, even with my really simplistic style, it takes me like 8 hours to finish a page, 6 to 8 hours to finish a page, right?
Yeah.
But writing is more soul wrenching. Like writing makes me question my life, it just like, and it just like, I feel the way about writing the same way I feel about exercising. Like before I have to do it, I feel like I want to avoid it. Like
Okay.
I'd rather do anything else. But then once I get going, I like it, right?
I love it. I love that
But,
analogy, especially
but
being
before
Asian.
I just do not want to sit down to write at
Yeah, you're
all.
like, oh, maybe I need to straighten these pictures on the wall.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my
Totally.
desk totally needs decluttering right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You said exercising. Do you have like a basic fitness routine or something?
I kind of do now. I did before the pandemic, and I'm just starting to go back to the gym.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's just like really, it's not sophisticated at all.
It doesn't need to be sophisticated.
Like
if you feel better after,
stuff.
then it's good.
Yeah. I feel ashamed telling the Kung Fu instructor about my fitness.
You shouldn't at all. You should not at all. Not at all. Not at all. I love hearing about what other people do for fun, and and the fact that it makes me feel a little bit better knowing like it takes you a while, like you have to really get into that zone for writing, because when I read your work, it seems so effortless because of course I get the finished product and it's like perfect and it's done. But knowing that like, no, it's a process, and like it took you 5 years of hard labor, and but it seems very effortless. When as a reader, I get to go through it really quickly. So
yeah, cartoonist friends and I joke about that all the time, right? Like a book will take you like 3 years, 5 years to finish, and half an hour to read.
Yeah.
But we still do it. I guess it's still worth it.
It is definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. But I think it's this amazing thing where you have that community, because you guys can empathize with one another of like the writer's block. And I usually ask all my creators on the show, like, what do you do when you have that writer's block thing? Do you have kind of a method of getting over it, or?
Yeah, I mean, I drink a lot of coffee. That helps. I go for walks, and then lately I've been forcing myself to write garbage. Like if I feel writer's block, I'll write like a bad version of what I'm trying to get out. And usually after I write the bad version a few times, it'll start getting better.
Then that works. Oh. And you ever consider writing prose? Or have you written prose? I apologize if I'm not familiar.
I wrote some prose for college for my degree, but I haven't since then. I don't know. I mean, I really do love prose stories, but I just feel like I have so much that I want to get done in comics, that I feel like I'd rather spend my time on comics.
Yeah, well, you do so well at it, so definitely keep it up, because I just gave you a long list of things. I mean, the Chinese culture has like thousands of folk tales for you to cover.
Man.
So.
Thousands and thousands. Yeah.
So do your parents read your books?
They try. Yeah, my dad reads it, and then he'll have like lots of questions about it, but I'm not really sure how to answer.
Interesting. Oh my God. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for that conversation, because, well, it's so fascinating, especially because I really feel something like American Born Chinese, especially, right, is very reflective of a lot of your experience. And I see, you should probably feel very vulnerable, I would guess. Like you're just kind of exposing a lot of what I feel like is yourself in the world, because it's so open and honest. And so I would imagine your dad's like, what do you mean? You I don't know if he interpreted it that way, or, so I would find it to be such an interesting conversation. So I'm going to let you go soon, but I have a couple final questions from my book club. I told them that I would ask you because of course this was required reading to my book club. And
thank you.
One of them wanted to know, like with the character of Chin Ki, which obviously is hilarious to, especially as Asian Americans. Was there anything you felt that was like too stereotypical or too like over the top of where you felt you were going to go with that character?
Yeah, I actually, one of my big regrets for that book is actually that I didn't exaggerate him enough. I felt like I should have exaggerated him more. This doesn't happen as much anymore, but when the book first came out, I would get people who would come up to me at like conventions and stuff, always non-Asian Americans, and they'd be like, "Oh, that cousin Chinky character, he's so funny. Do you have him on a t-shirt? Can I buy a t-shirt with his face on it? Or do you have like a plush doll?" Somebody asked me for a plush doll.
Oh wow.
And I was like, "Oh, that's not what I was trying to do with that character. That wasn't That wasn't it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I could have cut out some of that by exaggerating him even more, by making him look more monstrous, and by making him, like
Yeah.
maybe even using a crazier font or something.
Mhm. Wow, that's fascinating. So you would have exaggerated him even more.
Yeah. I would have pushed him more.
Yeah.
To cut out that interpretation, right? I don't want people to think he's cute.
Right. Because the point of it is, for him to be so obnoxious that it's like way over the top.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
And I guess this is a little bit more obvious, but which character did you feel like you were like growing up in terms of like characters in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like from my childhood, I have more of a heart attachment to Monkey King because it reminds me of my mom's stories. But the Jin Wang storyline is definitely pulling a lot from my life. Like I grew up in a situation that was almost exactly like that.
Yeah, I think even hearing, I think at the back of Superman Smashes the Klan, you wrote you shared the kind of that story. And I almost feel like I remember a part in American Born Chinese where it was like very similar. You just telling me about your friends, and you guys are laughing, and then someone comes by and makes a comment. And I remember like kind of seeing that right on the page. And so do you find that happens a lot, even in other storylines where you take a little bit from your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of us, most writers, most storytellers will pull from our own lives, even if we don't mean to, right? Just because everything comes out of our own perspective, so it's inevitable that pieces of our childhood, pieces of our past experience ends up on the page. I think that's true.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I will not take up any more of your time, even though I could talk to you for like another hour. So hopefully I can convince you to come back after I've read more of the DC stuff and all the new arcs and everything, and we can chat more about that. But this has been such a pleasure and an honor. Like I said off air, I'm just gonna contain my fandom and my fangirl. But this has been amazing to be able to discuss this with you, and thank you so much for sharing and for being so open.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely. Until next time. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/Sifu Mimi Chan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.